In his book, Horns and Halos, Dr. Wallace Hamilton tells of one of the weirdest auctions of all time. It took place in Washington, D.C. in 1926, where 1,500 patent models of old inventions were declared obsolete and placed on the auction block for public auction. So prospective buyers and onlookers chuckled as item after item came forward. These, of course, were patents that fell out of popularity. There were such things as the bed bug buster, or the illuminated cat that you could put out at night to scare the mice. Apparently, lit up cat scares mice. It would scare me. There were devices, of course, to prevent snoring. One was a trumpet that reached from the mouth to the ear, and so the snorer would hear first how loud the snoring was and be awakened. Then there was the adjustable pulpit that could be raised or lowered based on the height of any given speaker. Some of you would be glad for that. Needless to say, those 150,000, I think I misstated that earlier, 150,000 patents got a laugh, but in a little deeper sort of reality, 150,000 patents that had kind of gone obsolete represented sort of dreams that had busted, hopes that had been unmet, expectations that were unrealized. Now, it seems a little odd, I think, to talk about unrealized expectations so close to Christmas. I mean, we're supposed to be having a holly jolly Christmas, jingle bells, jingle bells. You know, we're supposed to be getting in the mood here, and yet the lessons keep talking to us about unmet expectations, about finding ourselves in a waiting room. And that's not where we want to be, because we've been shopping for Christmas since, well, almost last Christmas, and particularly since Costco began to put stuff out in September in the stores. That really got us jazzed up. So how can we possibly talk about that? Unless you're a person who has some unmet expectations and this time sort of pushes them to the fore, doesn't it? Or perhaps for those who have lost loved ones, either by death or divorce or by alienation. And we realize that this Christmas is going to be a little bit lonelier. Or perhaps if you've run on economic hard times in a time when our culture just glorifies materialism and spending, because you have to absolutely have that snoring device for your mate. That is the trumpet from the mouth to the ear of the snorer. Then you might find yourself disappointed at this time of year as well. John the Baptist, it's odd to jump John the Baptist to chapter 11 of Matthew's Gospel, but it goes back to pick up the idea that he's a forerunner of Jesus, a prophet telling his way. And so that's where it comes in. But it's a strange Advent text, so near to the cradle of Jesus, the manger, to have this guy not underneath the creche scene, not awaiting the birth of Jesus, but imprisoned. Now, John, ironically, was one of the first to proclaim Jesus the coming Messiah. You remember the story. Let's get back into the Christmas story, all right? Baby Jesus was in Mary, and Mary went to see Elizabeth, and baby John the Baptist was in Elizabeth, and when Mary's greeting reached the ears of Elizabeth, baby infant John the Baptist leapt for joy. And Elizabeth begins to tell the story. It's ironic then that in this story, John, one of the first the first tellers of the story of who this Messiah is going to be, baptizes Jesus, sends his disciples after him. Now in chapter 11 of Matthew is asking questions that reveal sort of second thoughts, unmet expectations, questions and disappointments. He asks his disciples to go to the Messiah, Jesus, and ask a very important question. He wants to know beyond a shadow of a doubt if Jesus is the Messiah. I mean, who can blame him? John, now imprisoned by Herod for calling Herod's behavior into question, is about not only to lose his career as a prophet, but also his life. And so he's taking stock of his life and whether or not he's backed the right horse in this particular case. And so they ask this question of Jesus: are you the one, or are we to look for another? John the Baptist found himself in the disappointing and disheartening reality. Now the Messiah has been on this earth for some 30 years, and nothing has happened. Now this one that John has said is the Lamb of God who's going to take away the sin of the world seems to be hanging out with the wrong people. Doesn't seem to be taking on the Romans head to head. In fact, he doesn't seem to be doing anything that's making very much of a splash beyond little backwater towns where he's preaching. John perhaps had some disappointment and certainly had questions. And sometimes that happens for us, doesn't it? Plans are disappointed. Expectations go unmet. Hope is deferred. John was disappointed, perhaps first of all, because he had different expectations of what the Messiah would be. We all have different expectations of what the Messiah would be. We have all different expectations of what God really is. He was a product of his time. He was a product of an era of rising nationalism, the appearance of a zealot party that really wanted a military liberation from the powers of Rome. And he was waiting for that kind of Messiah himself. Are you the one? Or should we wait for another, he asks. But perhaps his expectations were faulty. Have you ever had faulty expectations? Leo Buscaglia, who is a psychologist of a year ago, I used to love reading his books, talks about a disappointment when he was a teenager. It was Christmas time, and he writes, all of a sudden, under the Christmas tree, under the family's Christmas tree, was the largest Christmas present I had ever seen. It stood at least a foot taller than me and was heavier than me. It was just colossal standing there, and wonder of wonders, the box had my name on it. For 2 whole weeks, it sat there in our living room under that tree, creating a mystery and a mythos, defying any conventional attempts to learn what was in the box. I had to wait. During the weeks leading up to Christmas, he could think of nothing else but the present under the tree. Every day at school, every day in the playground, every day at lunch, he wasn't thinking about where he was thinking about what was in that colossally heavy, colossally large box. He remembers how many times in the past 2 weeks I had anticipated that Christmas morning, and then that morning came. Even as I was opening it, he said, I remember experiencing a vague sense of disappointment even before I opened it. The great mystery, he wrote, was about to come to an end, and I could no longer engage in my soaring dreams. I was going to find out what it really was. Well, it turned out that the gift inside the box was a handmade desk by his uncle. It was absolutely beautiful. He writes, by this time, though, nothing in the world could have satisfied my expectations. I can't imagine what I had expected. Still, and the disappointment was a lesson which would last a lifetime. Sometimes we're disappointed, aren't we, by the fact that we have faulty expectations. Not that what we've received is a bad thing, but because we expect something really unrealistic. There are people in this room who feel like life has cheated them. There's a person in this pulpit who from time to time joins that party and feels like I have been cheated and would like to have a do-over. But I can guarantee you that if we lost absolutely everything and regained it again, we would be eternally grateful for what we possess and what we are. The problem isn't so much with what we have or don't have. The problem is with our expectations around it. John the Baptist expected a Messiah who would come by storm, but nothing seemed to be happening. Jesus was preaching, he was doing some healing, but it wasn't meeting John's expectation. Are you the one, or should we wait for another? The second reason that John was disappointed is that he's looking for the wrong kind of signs. They asked the question, are you the one, or should we wait for another? And Jesus answered this way, go and tell John what you hear and what you see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. Now, I don't know, I'm a little bit like John in this way. Is that a yes or a no? Because I just want to have it pinned down a little bit. I mean, I appreciate that whole blind and deaf and restoration of the lame and that dead being raised thing is creepy, but it's amazing. But is it yes or no? Are you the one, I asked, or do we wait for another? And Jesus doesn't answer the question. He just gives him another question. Look around and see. What do you see? for yourselves. Centuries before Jesus, there was the writer of Isaiah, who is our first reading for today. Isaiah prophesied that what would take place during the Messiah's arrival would be this: the eyes of the blind would be opened, the ears of the deaf unstopped, the lame shall leap like a deer. Those weren't the signs that John was really looking for. He was looking in another direction, particularly toward Rome and particularly toward the military. He had a different idea in mind. I remember years ago, Charles Corral. Anybody remember Charles Corral? Is he still alive? I don't know. I haven't heard. He's not. Yeah. He used to tell those wonderful stories, and I remember years ago he told the story of a Christmas tree growing in the most unlikely places. Maybe you remember the story too. He wrote, "Trees need good soil and good weather, and up here in Colorado, in the Rockies, there's no soil, and there's terrible weather. Nothing can live up here, certainly not trees. That's why the tree is a kind of miracle, standing out here all by itself with miles of nothing around it. On a barren stretch of US 50, without another tree in sight, grows a juniper tree." He writes, "Nobody remembers who put the first Christmas ornament on it, some whimsical motorist years ago. From that day to this day, the tree has become decorated each year. Nobody knows who does it. But each year, by Christmas Day, the tree has become a Christmas tree. The tree, which has no business growing here at all, has survived against all odds. People who live miles away in all directions know and love this tree. Just looking at it makes you think about how unexpected life on earth can be. The tree is so lonely and so brave, and it seems to offer courage to those who pass by and a message, and it's the Christmas message, that there is life and hope even in a rough world." Isaiah wrote, "The wilderness and the dry land will be glad. The desert will rejoice and bloom. The den of the jackals will be replaced, and reeds will grow up within it." See, those aren't the kind of signs that most people look for. A Christmas tree growing in a rough place. You've probably seen them. A weed. Irene Shemansky took a picture. One of my favorite. Some of you don't know Irene. Irene was Eddie Shemansky's mom. Eddie had cerebral palsy, died almost a year ago to the day, and he had a picture of her taking a picture, and it's a picture on the road in front of her house in Ventura Park, and it's a dandelion growing right up in the middle of the street. And what's funny about the picture is that she takes it with the sun behind her, so her shadow is cast right next to it. And she gave it to me one day, and she said, this is me." And I said, "Yeah, that's a shadow of you." She said, "No, this is me, the flower growing up in the highway." Sometimes we want signs from God that would make belief imperative and not a relationship of trust and love. And sometimes we want to turn God into that kind of God who would rip the heavens open and make us all behave, but we really don't, because there would be no love. God chooses to work in insignificant little places in life. That's the meaning of the Christmas story. He shows up in a tiniest little town, in a conquered nation, in an oppressed time, when they are not the major superpower of the world. Rome is. They're displaced. It's a backwater place. Bethlehem, of all places. At least it could have been Jerusalem, but no, it's Bethlehem, and it's in a stable, and the child's in a manger, or he's working in a carpenter shop, or he's been strung up like thousands before him on a cross in what seems like defeat at the hands of the Romans. John was looking for the wrong kind of signs of what God was doing. And so often, so do we. The third reason that John was disappointed was that he didn't give God time. Now, that's a hard thing when you've spent your entire life preaching, and now at the end of your life, you're still wondering if this is the one or should we look for another. But John wanted action now. How many of us have that kind of spirituality? Show me yesterday. I don't want to wait till tomorrow, let alone next year or 3 years from now. But we are always in the waiting room with God. For God is doing things inside of us that we often cannot see, creating in that expectation an opportunity. But God doesn't work according to our schedules, but according to His. And sometimes it doesn't appear as if God is working at all. And that's where Advent brings us, to that place of God's silence, of waiting. Advent, in that first Advent, had been thousands of years of expectation. We lose that because we're racing from September to December 25th to have a Christmas. But we're waiting for something much more than boxes under a tree. We're waiting for much more than caroling and Christmas gifts and figgy pudding, whatever that is. We have longings and hopes, not just for ourselves, but for this weary, weary world. And we still wait with John and wonder. And that's what this season wants to invite us to engage, is the place of waiting and what God is doing in our world in the waiting, and more poignantly, what God is doing in you and me in that time of waiting. God is working in the world, ever working, slow, and sometimes the most insignificant backwater kind of places of our personalities and of our world. The fact that we still celebrate John the Baptist 2,000 years later tells us something about the working of God in the world. How about your life? And those 3 points about John, is your life got disappointments because you have unrealized or unrealistic expectations? Are you looking in the wrong places for your happiness? Have you learned to wait upon God? Getting all these stories, I haven't even gotten the e-zine yet from Terry, who gives all these great stories. I'm already getting all these great Christmas stories, and this is my final story. The kindergarten teacher was lining up 4 little cherubs for their Christmas program at school. Each of them was carrying a cutout, and it was a letter, and the letters were supposed to spell out star, because there's a star in the Christmas story. And a slight mix-up on the night of the play got the kids going in reverse order. And so when they turned around, the crowd saw rats. I just love that one. Whenever we put something in the place of our yearning that is not God, our yearnings and expectations go astray. And things can go to rats. Advent calls us to come back to that manger and to our expectations and hopes of what God can do in our lives. Bethlehem teaches us about expectations, about signs. It teaches us about patience, about enduring hardship and unmet hopes, dashed dreams, and expectations that are yet unrealized. God begins not by ripping open the heavens, but by coming through an opening of human flesh in the babe of Bethlehem, in humble surroundings, and He works slowly. Even at almost 33 years later, the forerunner of Jesus is scratching his head wondering, is that you? Or do we wait for another? But God is at work in our world. As He was in that Bethlehem then, He's at work in our world and our lives today for those who will wait and watch and wonder at the mystery of God. Sometimes when you're watching, you begin to see the most amazing things. You sit in your yard and you think, I live in the city. I don't, but some of you do. And you sit there just quietly and you become aware of the city that you thought was there is populated by a whole host of other citizens that are not human. And they invade your yard and they overwhelm you. And you never knew. Why did you never know? Because you didn't wait, and you didn't watch, and you didn't listen. But the gift is already under the tree. It's already right there for us, for those who will wait and watch and open our eyes and open our hearts to the way in which God is working, because God is at work. And Advent's other message is, because He's at work in your waiting, do not lose hope. Joy to the world is coming, for the Lord is come. Amen.